There are places in the wilderness where the old world never left, where the trees grow too close together, and the snow falls too quietly, where the stories told around campfires aren't just stories, they are warnings. Warnings carved into the history of the land itself, whispered by those who survived, and etched into the official reports of those who did not. What hunts in those absolute silences? What watches from the tree line with eyes that reflect no light? And what happens when you encounter something that is not just an animal, but a malevolent force born from starvation, cold, and a hunger that can never be sated? This is Verified Nightmare, where every nightmare is real, and every story is verified. Tonight, we document 11 of the most chilling, corroborated accounts of encounters with one of North America's most ancient and terrifying legends. We are not dealing with campfire tales. We are examining police transcripts, eyewitness testimonies from trained forestry workers, and law enforcement, unexplained disappearances with bizarre evidence left behind, and medical reports detailing injuries that defy conventional explanation. This is a clinical look at the phenomenon known as the Wendigo. Before we begin, hit subscribe and click the notification bell. The stories you are about to hear are not for the faint of heart. They are documented, investigated, and terrifyingly real. What you learn here might change how you see the wilderness forever. Our first story takes us to the remote expanse of the Algonquin Provincial Park in Ontario, Canada, a place of breathtaking beauty by day and impenetrable primordial darkness by night. It is here, according to a declassified Parks Canada incident report and the sworn testimony of 2 seasoned conservation officers, that a routine patrol turned into a desperate fight for survival against something that should not exist. The Algonquin Patrol. Evan McAllister and Leo Chen were the kind of men who knew the Algonquin backcountry like the lines on their own hands. Both in their 40s, both conservation officers with over 20 years of combined experience, their partnership was built on a foundation of mutual respect and a deep, professional familiarity with the wilderness. Evan, a burly man with a thick red beard, kept a meticulously detailed logbook in the patrol truck. Leo, quieter and more analytical, had an uncanny ability to navigate by the stars. Their patrol on the night of November 17, 2018, was standard, a check of the remote logging roads off Highway 60, looking for illegal activity or stranded motorists as the first serious cold snap of the season settled in. The temperature, according to their truck's thermometer, was negative 22 degrees Celsius. The world was a silent, black vault. The first anomaly was subtle. At approximately 10:14 p.m., Leo noted a complete absence of animal signs on their thermal imaging scope. No deer, no rabbits, not even the faint heat signature of mice in the underbrush. It was, in his words, later given to investigators, an ecological vacuum. The forest was holding its breath. They dismissed it as a product of the extreme cold. Then, the radio static began. Not the white noise of poor reception, but a low rhythmic pattern that seemed to almost mimic breathing. It would clear for a moment when Evan called in their position, then return, louder, as if something were exhaling directly into the receiver. The inciting incident occurred at mile marker 76 on the old fire access road. Their headlights swept across a figure standing at the tree line. Evan slowed, assuming a stranded hiker, but the details didn't coalesce. The figure was impossibly tall, well over 7 feet, and unnaturally thin, its silhouette a jagged tear against the snow-dusted pines. It was not wearing winter gear. It was, according to both men's independent statements, all wrong angles. It turned its head. Leo would later state, in a voice flat with trauma, its eyes. They weren't reflections. They were just dark spots that drank the light. The figure then moved, not by walking, but with a lopping, disjointed gait that carried it from the tree line to the center of the road 50 yards ahead, in a span of seconds that felt instantaneous. It stood, perfectly still, blocking their path. Evan hit the high beams. What they saw was seared into their memories. The thing was emaciated to a degree that defied survival, its grayish skin stretched taut over a skeletal frame. Its limbs were elongated, its hands ending in claws that seemed too long for its fingers. But the face was the worst part. Described in the official incident report as a disturbing mix of human and cervid features, it had a pronounced, elongated jaw, and where a nose should have been were only two dark slits, and it was smiling, a wide, rictus grin that showed pointed, needle-like teeth. Evan threw the truck into reverse. The thing tilted its head, the smile never fading. Then it opened its mouth. The sound that came out was not a roar. It was a high, piercing shriek that seemed to bypass their ears and vibrate directly in their skulls. The windshield of their Ford F-150 patrol truck, rated for extreme conditions, developed a spider web of cracks emanating from the center. The engine sputtered and died. Silence, more absolute than before, ushered in. Then, a smell flooded the cab, the scent of rotten meat and damp earth, so potent it made their eyes water. They could see its breath in the air, not puffs of steam, but a thin, oily-looking mist. It began to move toward them, its body moving with that same impossible, skittering speed, but taking its time. It was savoring their terror. Leo fumbled for the shotgun locked in the rack. His hands, steady through 100 bear encounters, were shaking violently. Evan tried the ignition again. Nothing. The thing was 20 yards away. 10. It raised one clawed hand, poised to swipe at the driver's side window. Leo managed to rack the slide. The sharp, metallic catch chunk echoed in the cab. The creature paused. It tilted its head again, as if curious about the sound. For a frozen second, they stared at it, and it stared at the barrel of the shotgun. Then, it was gone. Not turning and running, but simply vanishing from the spot, as if it had been a projection. The rotten smell dissipated. The truck's electronics flickered back to life. Evan turned the key, and the engine roared to life as if nothing had happened. They sped back to the district office, not speaking a word. Their supervisor, seeing their ashen faces and the cracked windshield, immediately filed a high-priority report. The aftermath is where verification solidifies. An inspection of the truck by a Parks Canada mechanic found no mechanical reason for the stall. The windshield crack was analyzed. The report states the fracture pattern was consistent with a high-frequency acoustic event, not impact or thermal stress. Soil samples from the road where the entity stood showed abnormally high levels of ammonium and decayed organic matter, unlike any other sample in the area. Both officers underwent mandatory psychological evaluation. The psychologist's notes, cited in the case file, state, both subjects show clear signs of acute traumatic stress. Notably, their accounts remain identical in specific, bizarre details, despite being interviewed separately. There is no evidence of collusion or hallucinogen use. The case was officially logged as an unidentified wildlife encounter, and the file was quietly closed 6 months later. Evan McAllister transferred to a desk job in Toronto and has never returned to the park. Leo Chen took an extended leave of absence. The final unresolved detail comes from the park's wildlife camera network. A motion-activated camera located 3 kilometers from the encounter site, reviewed weeks later as part of a routine data collection, captured a single blurry image at 10:32 p.m. that night. It shows a tall, thin, bipedal shape moving through the trees at a speed the system calculated to be approximately 38 miles per hour. The image caption in the database reads simply, "Anomaly. Subject unidentifiable." The radio silence of Whitefield, Maine. Maya Petrovich moved to the small, unincorporated township of Whitefield, Maine, for the silence. A former sound engineer from Boston, she sought respite from the constant urban drone after a series of debilitating migraines. Her new home was a refurbished cabin 10 miles from the nearest neighbor, a perfect haven of quiet. Her one vice, a link to the world she'd left, was an old, high-end shortwave radio setup. She would spend evenings slowly tuning through the frequencies, listening to the coded chatter of ships at sea, the distant buzz of overseas news, and the pure, strange poetry of number stations. It was her ritual, a way to touch humanity without being overwhelmed by it. The first break in the pattern was a frequency that shouldn't have existed. On the night of January 12th, during a particularly vicious blizzard that had knocked out her landline and satellite internet. Maya was scanning the bands. At 2:17 a.m., between the static, she found a clear signal. It was a man's voice, weak and trembling, speaking in English with a flat, Midwestern accent. He wasn't using radio protocol. He was just talking. Day 7. The fire won't stay lit. The sounds outside the cave have stopped. I think it knows I can hear it. I can smell it now, like wet fur and something sweet. God, something sweet. Then a long pause filled with the crackle of a weak transmitter. It's mimicking the wind. Don't listen to the wind. The transmission cut to a hollow, rushing static that sounded unnervingly like a deep, rhythmic breath, then faded. Maya, assuming it was a fellow enthusiast caught in a storm, logged the frequency a little-used civilian band and thought nothing more of it. The next night, at the same time, the signal was back. The man's voice was weaker, slurred as if from cold or exhaustion. Teeth, all wrong. Not an animal. I think it's wearing a jacket. A red plaid jacket. It's standing in the trees. It's so thin. A sound of ragged sobbing. Then the transmission ended with a sharp, final click. This time, Maya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm. She tried to triangulate the signal, but her equipment was for reception, not precise location. It seemed to be originating from the vast, uninhabited woods to the north, towards the Canadian border. She contacted the local sheriff's office the next morning via her restored internet, reporting a possible distressed individual. The deputy who followed up was polite but dismissive. He told her it was likely a hoax or a cross signal from a trucker's CB. The vast northern woods, he said, were empty that time of year. No missing persons reports matched the description. But the broadcasts continued, night after night. At 2:17 a.m., the descriptions became more fragmented, more horrific. The entity was now tapping on trees with its long fingers. It was hurling stones onto the roof of his shelter. It was whispering his name, a name Maya never caught, in a voice that was like ice breaking. Then, on the 6th night of broadcasts, the man's voice was suddenly clear, sharp with pure terror. It's inside the cave. The smell is everywhere. It's not hungry for food. It's the transmission dissolved into a scream that was abruptly cut off, followed by a new sound. A low, guttural chattering, a wet, clicking noise that seemed to be made by a mouse with too many teeth. And underneath it, a faint, rhythmic tearing sound. This lasted for exactly 1 minute and 17 seconds. Then, dead air. Maya was now in a state of sustained panic. She packed a bag, ready to drive to the sheriff's office and demand they listen to her recordings. But as she went to unplug her radio, the receiver crackled to life on its own, the dial unmoved from the haunted frequency. It was 3:00 p.m. broad daylight. The voice that came through was different. It was the same flat Midwestern accent, but the tone was wrong. It was hollow, empty, and terrifyingly calm. Maya, it knew her name. The silence isn't empty, Maya. It's full. I'm so full. Then, a sound that her professional ear could not reconcile. A perfect, crystal clear audio recording of her own front door creaking open, followed by the sound of her own floorboards groaning under a heavy, uneven weight. From her living room, she froze. The sounds from the radio were in perfect sync with the real sounds happening in her house. The broadcast was live. She was not alone. With the courage born of pure adrenaline, Maya grabbed the fireplace poker and flung open her studio door. The living room was empty. The front door was locked. But on the floor, just inside the threshold, was a pile of freshly fallen snow, already melting. And pressed into the center of it was a single, elongated footprint, with marks at the front that could only be claws. The aftermath is documented in an official police report filed by the Lincoln County Sheriff's Office. Deputies responded to Maya's frantic 911 call. They found her in a state of shock, her audio equipment still on, recording dead air from the frequency. The footprint was photographed and cast. The report notes the cast was unlike any known local wildlife, describing an anomalous, bipedal structure with a length of nearly 14 inches. An evidence technician also reviewed Maya's digital recordings. Their finding, noted in the case file appendix, states, Voice analysis of the final transmission indicates a high probability the speaker is the same individual from the earlier distress calls. However, acoustic signature suggests the final transmission was made from an extremely close proximity to the receiver, potentially within a few hundred yards, despite no other dwellings being in the area. A search of the woods revealed no cave, no camp, and no signs of the man in the red plaid jacket. Maya sold her cabin at a loss and moved back to the city. The case remains open, classified as a suspected hoax with unexplained elements. The chilling, unresolved detail is this: every year, on the anniversary of the final transmission, the Whitefield Town Library, which maintains a public shortwave radio for the community, receives a brief and traceable signal at 2:17 a.m. It is always the same: 10 seconds of that same wet, chattering click, followed by a whisper that the librarian, an elderly woman named Agatha Bell, swears sounds like, "Still hungry." The sheriff's office has been unable to trace it. The Groom Lake Anomaly. Dr. Aris Thorne was a man of phenomenally specific expertise. A senior geologist for a private contractor with the Department of Defense clearance, his world was one of spectral analysis, core samples, and seismic data. In the spring of 2015, his team was deployed to a remote, nondescript valley on the western edge of the Groom Lake Range in Nevada. Officially, they were conducting a mineral survey. The unspoken understanding, detailed in their heavily redacted project briefing, was to analyze unusual subterranean acoustic signatures picked up by spy satellites. The base of operations was a cluster of industrial trailers, a field lab filled with the hum of servers and the smell of ozone and coffee. The landscape was a monochrome expanse of scrub and dust, ringed by barren mountains. The silence was profound, broken only by the wind and the generators. The inciting incident was a data spike. On April 8th, one of their buried seismic monitors, positioned 3 miles north of the camp in a location designated Site Charlie, recorded a tremor registering 0.7 on the Richter scale. It was not the strength that was odd, but the signature. The readout, which Aris reviewed that evening, showed a waveform that was asymmetrical and pulsed, unlike any natural geological event. In his log, he wrote, "Anomalous signal at 23 hours 17 minutes and 4 seconds. Pattern suggests repeated, rhythmic impact, or emission. Non-terrestrial mineral composition not indicated. Requires further ground verification." He requested a solo run to Site Charlie the next day to take surface samples and inspect the sensor array. Permission was granted, with the standard admonition to maintain radio check-ins every 30 minutes. The drive out was uneventful. The site was marked by a single antenna sticking from the hard-packed earth. Aris parked his Humvee, collected his kit, and began his work. The first radio check at 10:30 a.m. was normal. At 11 o'clock a.m., his voice was calm, but carried a note of professional curiosity. "Base, this is Thorne. I'm seeing something odd. The soil around the primary sensor is disturbed, not by fauna. Patterns are geometric, almost like scrape marks in a radial pattern." Proceeding to document, his 11:30 a.m. check-in was clipped. "Base, Thorne. Confirming, the markings are not natural erosion. They are fresh. Depth suggests significant force. There's also a smell, metallic, ozone, like after a lightning strike. Stand by." The next scheduled check-in at noon never came. Base attempted to raise him at 12:15, then 12:30. At 12:47, a transmission burst through. It was Aris's voice, but stripped of its usual clinical calm. He was whispering, breathless, the microphone close to his lips. "Base, do not approach. Do not send anyone. It's in the rocks. It's been listening." The signals weren't geological. They were vocalizations. A sound of shifting gravel and labored breathing. "It's tall. God, it's thin. Like a stick figure. Skin like ash. It's not wearing anything. No, wait. It has straps, webbing, military-grade webbing. Empty. It's studying the sensor. It knows what it is." A low chittering sound, clearly not human, echoed faintly in the background of the transmission. Arisa's voice became a desperate hiss. "It sees me. It's turning. Its eyes are black. No pupils. Just black. It's smiling. The transmission dissolved into a scream, a horrific sound of tearing fabric and a wet, crunching impact, followed by the unmistakable, frenzied sound of something feeding. Then, for 10 seconds, nothing but the open microphone picking up the desert wind. Finally, a new sound, a slow, deliberate exhale, close to the mic, followed by a voice that was a grotesque parody of Arisa's own, speaking in a perfect, flat mimicry of his earlier report. "Anomalous signal. Confirmed. Site compromised." The radio went dead. A security detail in an armored vehicle reached Site Charlie within 20 minutes. The verification from this point is drawn from the internal incident report, portions of which were later obtained through a FOIA request by a civilian watchdog group, with heavy redactions. They found the Humvee, engine still idling. Aris Thorne's equipment was scattered, his sample bags torn open. His personal sidearm, a 9mm Beretta, was found in the dirt, unfired, the safety still on. There was a significant amount of blood, later confirmed by DNA to be Thorne's, soaked into the earth in a wide, disturbed area. The radial scrape marks in the soil were photographed. The report's analysis stated they were inconsistent with known tools or vehicle tracks. The most disturbing piece of evidence was the recovery of the field radio. The microphone grill was caved in, as if crushed by immense, focused pressure. A forensic audio analysis of the final transmission, noted in an appendix, concluded the non-human vocalizations share structural similarities with the anomalous seismic signals recorded prior to the incident. Dr. Aris Thorne was listed as missing, presumed dead. No body was ever recovered. The official story cited a possible animal attack, though no animal in the Nevada desert could account for the scene or the audio. The project was terminated, and the area was placed under a new, more restrictive security designation. The unresolved detail comes from a separate, seemingly unrelated event. 6 months later, a family hiking in the Spring Mountains, over 100 miles from Groom Lake, reported seeing a tall, skinny man watching them from a cliff face. When the father used binoculars, he saw the figure was naked, gray-skinned, and wore only what he described as a torn-up army harness. Before they could report it, the figure stepped backwards off the cliff. A subsequent search found no body, no impact site, but rangers did document a set of strange, deep scrapes in the sandstone at the cliff's edge. The report was filed and forgotten, until a data clerk with the security clearance noticed the description of the webbing and filed a confidential cross-reference. That memo, its conclusion heavily blacked out, is the last official document to mention the Aris Thorne case. The last winter of the Black River lumber camp, Finn Cavanaugh wasn't running from the law, but he was running from everything else. A failed marriage, a bankrupt business, and a gnawing sense of his own shortcomings led him to take a job as the winter watchman for the Black River Logging Company in the isolated forests of northern Minnesota. The camp was a ghost town of silent bunkhouses, a frozen mess hall, and skeletal logging equipment draped in tarps. His sole company was an aging husky named Buck and a satellite phone for weekly check-ins. Finn saw it as a test, a chance to prove his resilience against the elements, against the solitude. The previous watchman, an old Ojibwe man named Walter, had left him with only one piece of advice, delivered with a grave look. When the wind stops, you go inside. You lock the door, and you do not answer the knocking, no matter what voice it uses. The first month was peaceful, a rhythm of chopping wood, checking generators, and walking the perimeter with Buck. The silence was immense, but Finn filled it with podcasts and audiobooks. The first break in the pattern was the theft. On the morning of January 25th, he found the lock on the main equipment shed snapped, not cut, but twisted apart. Inside, nothing of obvious value was taken. No fuel, no tools. Only a heavy, chain-link winch cable. Several hundred feet of it was missing. The drag marks in the fresh snow led from the shed, across the clearing, and into the dense pine forest. They were not footprints. They were two deep, parallel grooves, as if something heavy had been dragged. Buck refused to go near the tree line, his tail tucked, a low whine in his throat. Finn reported it to the company via satellite phone. The dispatcher, unconcerned, said it was likely a bear or a trespassing trapper, and a replacement lock would be on the next supply run in 3 weeks. Then the sounds began, not at night, but in the dead of afternoon, when the winter sun was at its weakest. A distant, metallic clanking, like the stolen cable being struck against a tree. It would echo through the frozen woods, seeming to come from a different direction each time. Buck would growl, the hair on his spine standing straight. A few days later, Finn found the first effigy. Hanging from a branch at the edge of the clearing was a crude sculpture made of woven pine branches, animal bones, and strips of what looked like cured leather. At its center, tied with intricate knots, was a lock of dark hair that matched Finn's own. He burned it, his hands shaking. The inciting incident that shattered any pretense of normalcy was the night the wind stopped. It was February 10th. A howling blizzard had raged all day, then ceased abruptly at sunset. The silence that followed was absolute, a physical weight. Remembering Walter's warning, Finn bolted the cabin door, stoked the wood stove, and loaded his rifle. Buck stood rigid in the center of the room, staring at the door. An hour into the silence, the knocking started. A slow, deliberate knock on the heavy timber door echoes through the cabin. It was firm, human. A voice called out, weak and trembling. "Hello? Please. I'm lost. I'm so cold. I saw your light." It was the voice of a young woman. Buck let out a snarl so vicious it startled Finn. The dog was not looking at the door. He was looking at the wall, as if he could see through it. Finn, heart hammering, remained silent. The knocking came again. "Please, just let me in. It's out here. It's coming." The voice cracked with a sob that sounded terrifyingly genuine. Finn, against every screaming instinct, moved to the window, peeking through a crack in the shutter. The porch was empty. There were no footprints in the deep snow leading to his door. None. The voice was coming from nowhere. As he watched, the motion-activated security light over the shed flicked on. Standing beneath it, illuminated in the harsh LED glare, was a figure. It was tall, emaciated, its skin the color of a week-old corpse. It was not wearing the stolen cable. The cable was wound around its limbs and torso, woven into its form like some horrific exoskeleton. In one long-fingered hand, it held the end of the cable, which it was slowly, methodically, tapping against the shed's metal siding, the source of the clanking. Its head was lowered, but its mouth was moving, and the young woman's desperate voice was emanating from it. It was a perfect, heartbreaking mimicry. It stopped tapping, turned its head slowly, and looked directly at Finn's peephole. It smiled, its mouth stretching far too wide, and waved the cable at him with a grotesquely playful gesture. Finn stumbled back, tripping over Buck. He grabbed the satellite phone. The connection was dead, showing no signal for the first time all winter. The knocking on the door resumed, this time harder, shaking the frame. The young woman's voice was gone, replaced by Walter's old, raspy tone. "Finn, boy, open up. It's gotten in the woodshed. I'm hurt." Then it shifted to the dispatcher's flat, corporate voice. "Kavanaugh, this is a security check. Confirm your status. Open the door for visual verification." Finally, it used his ex-wife's voice, weeping. "Finn, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. Please let me in. I need you." He spent the night in a corner, rifle trained on the door. Buck pressed against him, as the thing outside cycled through every voice it had ever heard him listen to on his podcasts, his phone calls, his past. At dawn, the voices stopped. The wind returned. When he finally mustered the courage to look outside, he found the porch untouched, but the security light over the shed was shattered. Wound around the base of the post was the stolen winch cable, tied in an impossibly complex series of knots that formed a shape that looked like a screaming face. The aftermath is verified by the company's own incident report and the responding sheriff's deputies. Finn was found 2 days later when the supply truck arrived early. He was incoherent, suffering from severe hypothermia and shock, though the cabin had been warm. Buck was alive, but would never stop flinching at metallic sounds. The sheriff's report notes the broken security light, the prank cable arrangement, and the lack of any human tracks, but attributes Finn's state to isolation psychosis. The company quietly paid for his extended medical leave and therapy. The unresolved detail is recorded in the journal of the Ojibwe elder, Walter, who had refused to return to the camp. In an entry dated the previous spring, he wrote, "The Wendigo does not just hunger for flesh, it hungers for what we are. It steals our tools to mock our ingenuity. It steals our voices to mock our compassion. It winters in our fear. The man who takes my place will be its new well. I hear it laughing in the north wind already." Walter passed away 3 weeks after Finn was rescued. His family reported that in his final days, he would often startle, look towards the window, and whisper, "It's knocking again. Don't let it use my voice." The watcher of Route 117, Officer Lena Vance, had patrolled the rural stretch of Vermont State Route 117 for 8 years. It was a quiet beat, known more for handing out warnings to leaf-peeping tourists than for serious crime. Her life was a study in pleasant routine: coffee from the same gas station, the same evening check-in with her son, the same slow cruise past darkened farmhouses and dense tracts of maple forest. She was a skeptic by nature and by training, her worldview built on tire marks, toxicology reports, and verifiable facts. The legend of the roadside watcher was local folklore to her, a campfire story used to spook teenagers into driving safely. The descriptions varied: a tall, gaunt figure seen just beyond headlights, a pale face in the trees, but Lena dismissed it as misidentified moose or the product of late-night fatigue. That changed in the early hours of November 3rd. The first call that night was mundane. A motorist reported a deer carcass on the shoulder near mile marker 33. Lena responded, her cruiser's light bar painting the frost-covered pines in flashes of blue. It wasn't a deer, it was a full-grown bull elk, an animal not common to that specific area, and it hadn't been hit by a car. According to her official report, the animal appeared to have been forcibly dismembered. The limbs were not torn, but separated at the joints with a precision that suggested tools, yet no tool marks were visible on the bone. The carcass was hollowed out. The organs and most major muscles were missing. Strangest of all, the area around the body was devoid of blood, as if it had been drained elsewhere. There were no animal tracks, only a single set of large, deep, bipedal impressions in the soft earth of the ditch that led into the woods. The prints, which she photographed, showed elongated feet with what appeared to be 2 prominent toe-like indentations at the front. She called it in as a probable poaching incident, though a deep unease settled in her gut. The stillness of the woods felt attentive. 2 hours later, a second call came in. A terrified trucker on his CB radio reported a crazy person standing in the middle of the road near mile marker 41, waving their arms. When he'd gotten closer, he realized the person was too damn tall and skinny, and was holding something that glinted. The trucker swerved, nearly jackknifing. He didn't stop. Lena sped to the location, her skepticism now edged with adrenaline. She found nothing on the road, but her spotlight caught a reflection from the tree line. Hanging from a low branch was a string of gleaming objects. She approached cautiously. It was a necklace of sorts, made from what she first thought were polished stones. Closer inspection, detailed in her supplementary report, revealed they were the meticulously cleaned and polished vertebrae of the elk, strung together with what appeared to be its own dried tendons. The glint had been from a single piece of polished quartz tied at the center. It was a trophy. It was a warning. The inciting incident that fused folklore with terrifying reality was Lena's own observation. After securing the grisly artifact as evidence, she decided to patrol the connecting Forest Service road, a dirt track that ran parallel to the highway for a few miles. She drove slowly, her spotlight panning across the dense wall of trees. For a moment, the beam swept across a clearing about 50 yards into the woods. There was a figure. It was standing absolutely still, facing her. It matched every exaggerated description she'd ever heard. Toweringly tall, unnaturally thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its torso. Its skin was pale, almost gray in the harsh light, but it was the details that broke her professional composure. It was wearing tattered, muddy clothing, a flannel shirt and torn jeans that looked like they might have come from a missing hiker. In one hand, It held the stripped, bloody femur of the elk like a club. And its face. It had no nose, only slits. Its mouth was a dark line, but its eyes reflected the spotlight back with a bright, cellular sheen, like a deer's. It didn't blink. Lena slammed the cruiser to a halt, fumbling for her radio. "Dispatch, 7 Adam 3. I have a visual on a suspect near the service road off 117. Possible 10-54 mental subjects, armed with a bone." Her voice, recorded on the patrol channel, betrayed a tremor. As she spoke, the figure moved. It didn't run. It stepped backwards into the trees with an unnerving, gliding fluidity, disappearing into the darkness between one heartbeat and the next. She drew her sidearm and exited the vehicle. Against all protocol, the clearing was empty, but where the figure had stood, the ground was not frozen. The earth was soft, black, and reeked of spoiled meat and a coppery, chemical smell she couldn't place. There were no clear footprints, only a deep, singular depression, as if something heavy had stood there for a very long time. She called for backup. A K-9 unit was dispatched. The verification comes from the subsequent investigation file. The K-9, a veteran German shepherd named Rex, tracked the scent from the clearing about 100 yards before stopping dead. He began to whimper, then backed away, refusing to proceed, a behavior his handler noted was highly anomalous for this dog. A state police forensic team collected the soil sample from the clearing. Their analysis, appended to the file, noted unusually high concentrations of adrenaline, cortisol, and a novel organic compound similar to forms of synthetic pheromone. In simpler terms, the ground was saturated with stress hormones and something designed to provoke terror. The elk vertebrae necklace was analyzed. No fingerprints were found, but the tendons showed signs of being worked while still fresh, less than an hour after death. Officer Lena Vance requested and was granted a permanent transfer to a daytime desk position in Montpelier. The case remains officially unsolved, classified as aggravated poaching and menacing. The chilling, unresolved detail is an ongoing pattern documented in the Vermont State Police Annual Crime Statistic Anomalies Report. Every November, for the 3 years following Lena's encounter, there has been a single, bizarre animal mutilation incident along Route 117. Each time, a crude trophy made of bones is found nearby. Each time, a lone motorist reports seeing a tall, thin figure just off the road in the days prior. The incidents are never linked publicly, but the internal bulletin includes a standing order for patrols in that area to be conducted in pairs after dark. The last line of the bulletin reads, "Extreme caution advised. Subject may exhibit advanced mimicry and psychological warfare tactics. Do not engage alone." The Fire Lookout of Deadwood Peak. For decades, the Deadwood Peak Fire Lookout was a seasonal post manned by forestry students and wilderness enthusiasts. In the summer of 2019, that changed. The previous lookout, a seasoned volunteer named Gerald, had quit abruptly 2 weeks into the season, leaving only a scrawled note that read, "The trees are wrong. It walks between them." He refused to elaborate, and the Forest Service, short-staffed, hired Kato Tanaka. Kato was a graduate student in botany, a logical and methodical young man who saw the job as a paid retreat to study alpine flora. The lookout was a single-room cabin on stilts, perched atop a rocky spire with a 360-degree view of endless, undulating green. His only link to the world was a satellite internet connection and a single sideband radio for daily check-ins. His meticulous nature was perfect for the job. He kept precise logs of weather, animal sightings, and smoke. The first irregularity was in the trees themselves. From his vantage, Kato began to notice strange patterns of discoloration in the canopy about a mile to the north, in a drainage area called Whisper Creek. Patches of pine needles were turning a sickly, grayish-white, not from blight or drought, but as if the chlorophyll was being drained from them. The patches formed vague, sprawling shapes that, when viewed from above through his spotting scope, seemed almost circulatory, like veins. He logged it as possible unknown fungal infection and reported it. A forestry team was scheduled to investigate, but not for 3 weeks. The sounds began soon after. It was not the wind. Kato knew the sound of the wind in the firs. This was a low, sub-auditory thrum that he felt in his teeth more than heard. A vibration that would start at dusk and cease at dawn. It made him nauseous. Then came the animal behavior. Birds avoided the Whisper Creek drainage entirely, creating a silent, moving hole in the forest's audio landscape. A herd of elk he observed stampeded through a meadow below, not from a predator behind them, but as if fleeing something ahead. That something never appeared in his scope. The inciting incident was the radio distortion. During his evening check-in on July 12th, the ranger's voice crackled through, asking for his weather observation. As Kato replied, "Clear skies, light wind from the west," a second voice superimposed itself over the transmission. It was a dry, papery whisper, speaking in time with him lagging a half-second behind. It said, "Clear lies. Lights in from the nest." The ranger came back, annoyed. "Repeat your last. Deadwood, you're cutting out with some weird echo." Kato, heart-pounding, repeated himself. The whisper echoed again, this time twisting his words further. "Fear dies. Night begins in the chest." The ranger signed off, apparently not hearing the distortion on his end. Kato's radio was receiving a signal the transmitter was not sending. That night, during the deep dark, the motion-activated security light on the catwalk outside his door flicked on. Kato looked out the window. Standing on the rocky outcrop 30 yards from the base of the lookout tower was a figure. It was impossibly tall and thin, its outline blurry, not due to distance, but because it seemed to be subtly vibrating in tune with the sub-audible thrum. It was facing away from him, looking out over the forest. In its hand, it held a long, straight branch, like a staff. As Kato watched, frozen, the figure slowly raised the staff and pointed it directly at the Whisper Creek drainage. As it did, the thrumming vibration intensified. Kato's binoculars, hanging from a hook, rattled against the wall. A glass of water on his table developed concentric ripples. The figure then turned its head, not its body, rotating it a full 180 degrees to look directly up at the lookout cabin. Its face was in shadow, but 2 points of faint, phosphorescent green light stared back at him. It held the gaze for a 10 count, then turned its head back, lowered the staff, and walked into the tree line. It didn't push branches aside. The trees seemed to part for it, their trunks bending away as it passed before snapping back into place. Kato's professional composure shattered. He spent the rest of the night barricaded in the cabin, the satellite phone in his hand. At first light, he called his supervisor and demanded an immediate extraction, citing a severe, undocumented environmental hazard. He was told a helicopter couldn't be spared for 3 days. Desperate, he decided to conduct his own ground investigation. He needed proof. He hiked to the Whisper Creek drainage. The verification comes from the data he collected and the subsequent Forest Service environmental report. The air in the drainage was dead, still, and cold. 20 degrees colder than the surrounding area. The sickly trees were not infected with fungus. Samples he took, later analyzed by a university lab, showed the cells were empty. The cellular structure was intact, but the protoplasm had been cleanly removed, as if siphoned out. The ground was covered in a fine, gray powder, not ash, but desiccated lichen and moss, reduced to dust. And in the center of the worst affected area, he found the source of the vein-like patterns. A single ancient pine, its bark bleached bone white, stood in a small clearing. Carved into its trunk at chest height was a symbol that matched the tall figure from the petroglyphs in the Halifax drains. At the base of the tree was a circle of stones, and within it, arranged with ritualistic care, were the bones of dozens of small animals: squirrels, birds, a fox. All were clean, dry, and sucked, utterly free of marrow. Kato took photos and video. As he framed a shot of the bone circle, his camera's audio picked up a whisper from directly behind him. "You are a good student. You have seen my garden." He spun around. There was nothing, but leaning against the white pine was the staff he had seen in the entity's hand. It wasn't a branch. It was a human femur, polished smooth, lashed with sinew to a longer tibia. Hanging from it were small, dried pouches that smelled of spoiled herbs. He fled back to the lookout. The helicopter arrives 2 days later. He presented his evidence. The Forest Service's internal hazard report, leaked years later by an employee, confirms the biomass depletion event at Whisper Creek and the anomalous temperature gradient. It officially attributes it to a localized geothermic gas leak causing rapid desiccation, a theory the lead biologist on the report disputed in a marginal note, writing, "Gas doesn't arrange bones in concentric circles." The bone staff was never recovered. Cato left forestry and now works in a city-based lab. The unresolved detail is a satellite spectral imaging scan of the region, taken for unrelated climate study 6 months after the incident. The scan, which measures chlorophyll density, shows the Whisper Creek drainage as a distinct, spreading gray blotch, like a wound. But more chillingly, it shows a thin, perfectly straight line of depleted vegetation, less than a yard wide, leading from the drainage directly to the base of Deadwood Peak. It ends right where the figure was standing that night. The report's author, unaware of Cato's story, noted it as a possible seismic fissure or undocumented fungal rhizome network. The line has grown longer in each subsequent yearly scan, moving slowly, deliberately, towards the next remote peak to the east. The echoes of the Halifax storm drain system. Marcus Lee was an urban explorer with an engineer's mind. For him, the labyrinthine storm drains beneath Halifax, Nova Scotia, weren't just forgotten tunnels. They were a historical record, a map of the city's growth etched in brick and concrete. His YouTube channel, Subterranean Halifax, was dedicated to meticulous documentation, not cheap thrills. He always filed explore notices with the city, wore a high-visibility vest, and carried a gas detector and two-way radio. His venture on October 28 was meant to map a rarely accessed Victorian-era overflow chamber, a cathedral-like space built in 1887, known in archives as Sump Chamber D. He brought his friend Chloe, a fellow history student, to operate a second camera. The descent was routine. The entrance was a rusted but unsealed maintenance hatch behind a disused warehouse. The air was cold, damp, and carried the familiar smell of stagnant water and mildew. Their headlamps cut through the darkness, illuminating arched brickwork slick with condensation. The first anomaly was acoustic. As they moved deeper into an older section, their footsteps and the gentle drip of water began to produce a faint, lingering echo that seemed to last a second too long, as if the tunnel were subtly mimicking them. Marcus noted it in his audio log as interesting resonance in the sector, possibly due to brick porosity. Chloe was less clinical. She whispered, "It feels like someone's walking just behind us, matching our steps." They reached Sump Chamber D. It was vast, a circular space 50 feet across, with a deep, dark pool in the center. A single brick walkway circled the edge. As Marcus set up his tripod, Chloe's headlamp swept across the far wall. She gasped. Scratched into the bricks, at a height of at least 8 feet, were symbols. They weren't graffiti. They were a mix of crude animal figures, stick-like human forms, and spirals. Marcus, who had studied some local Micmac petroglyphs, recognized a similarity in style, but these were sharper, more frantic, and depicted scenes of violence and consumption. One showed the stick figures hunting a moose. Another showed a much taller, emaciated figure towering over the hunters. The final series showed the tall figure alone, surrounded by human shapes that were drawn smaller, as if cowering. The inciting incident was Chloe's discovery. While Marcus photographed the carvings, she trained her light on the dark pool. Something was floating just beneath the surface. Using a telescoping pole, she hooked it and dragged it to the edge. It was a modern waterproof backpack. Inside, they found the identification of a university student who had been reported missing 6 months earlier after a night out. His wallet, phone, and keys were there. So was a small, leather-bound journal. The final entry, dated the night he disappeared, was written in a shaky hand. Came down here to, I don't know why, heard singing, beautiful singing. It led me here. It's not a person. It's using a person's voice. It's in the water. It's been following me. It's so hungry. It says it's been down here since the Great Fire, since they built over its woods. It calls me, the offering. The last sentence was a smeared scrawl. The echo is its mouth. As Marcus read the words aloud, the echo of his voice returned, but this time, it didn't fade. It continued, repeating his last 3 words, is its mouth, in a perfect copy of his own tone. Then, it changed. The echo began to speak on its own, using Marcus's voice, but with a hollow, hungry inflection. Offering, fresh, too, Chloe screamed. The sound of her scream echoed back a second later, twisted into a high, gleeful shriek. The water in the central pool began to ripple, not from the center, but from the edges, as if something large were moving just beneath the walkway at their feet. They grabbed their gear and ran, abandoning the backpack. The tunnels, which Marcus had mapped meticulously, now seemed to twist and turn incorrectly. Their headlamps flickered, and the echo pursued them. It used their own panicked breaths, amplified them into ragged, monstrous gasps. It used their whispered curses, playing them back as taunts. It then began to use the missing student's voice, pleading, "Help me, I'm still down here," followed by a wet, gurgling laugh. The thing was hurting them, using their own sounds and their own fear as a weapon. They came to a junction they didn't recognize. From a side tunnel shrouded in absolute darkness, they heard a new sound, a slow, wet, dragging, and a low, chattering click. A smell washed over them, the stench of the stagnant pool mixed with the cloying sweetness of decayed meat. In a moment of sheer instinct, Marcus turned off his headlamp and pulled Chloe into a shallow, brick alcove, clamping a hand over her mouth. They stood in utter darkness, holding their breath. The dragging sound grew closer. They could hear labored, rasping breathing that wasn't human. They could feel a cold draft, as if a massive body were moving past their hiding place, blocking the airflow from the tunnel ahead. The entity paused. The chattering stopped. In the silence, they heard a drip, 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 not of water, but of something thicker. Then, the echo spoke again, this time not mimicking them, but in its own raw, ancient voice, a dry rustle like dead leaves and breaking bones. It spoke a single word directly into the darkness beside them. Found. They broke and ran blindly, driven by pure terror. They somehow found a maintenance ladder and burst out onto the street, filth-covered and hysterical. The aftermath is verified by the Halifax Police Missing Persons Unit. The backpack and journal were recovered by a sanctioned police search team. The journal entry was corroborated as the student's handwriting. Forensic analysis of the chamber confirmed the carvings were recent, likely made within the past few years, with tools not consistent with the student's possessions. The most significant verification came from an audio engineer hired by the family to analyze Marcus E.'s camera footage. While the video was too dark, the audio track was clear. The engineer's report confirmed the presence of distinct, intelligent parroting and manipulation of the explorer's vocal signatures, with time delays inconsistent with natural reverberation in the recorded environment. In short, the echoes were impossible. The student's case remains open. Marcus and Chloe no longer explore. The unresolved detail is archived in the city's Public Works Department. A senior inspector, after reviewing the police findings, quietly ordered a new, heavy-grade grating welded over the entrance hatch to Sump Chamber D. The work order, under reason for closure, does not cite structural issues. It states, biological hazard containment, unauthorized entry strictly prohibited, acoustic anomaly protocol in effect. Maintenance workers who service the adjacent tunnels now do so with noise-canceling communication gear, and are instructed to immediately evacuate if they hear their own voices repeating words they did not speak. The unfilled seat on Flight 447. The disappearance of regional commuter Flight 447, a Cessna 208 caravan en route from Thunder Bay to a remote fly-in fishing lodge, was a minor news story. Engine failure over the trackless boreal forest, a tragic but explainable accident. The wreckage was never found due to the remoteness of the search area. The official investigation by the Transportation Safety Board of Canada listed the cause as undetermined, presumed catastrophic mechanical failure. This is the public record. The private file, sealed under a National Defense Confidentiality Order, tells a different story. It centers on a single passenger manifest anomaly and the testimony of the lone survivor, a man named Elias Vance, who was never supposed to be on that plane. Elias was a last-minute addition, a geologist filling in for a sick colleague. He was a man of rigid habit, and his habit was to record ambient audio on a handheld digital recorder during flights, a quirky personal project to collect soundscapes of isolation. The flight carried 5 passengers plus the pilot. The manifest, however, listed 6 passenger names. Seat 1C was assigned to a Mr. G. Tallman, but no one by that name checked in at the terminal. The ticket was a cash purchase made an hour before the flight. The gate agent had no memory of the man. Security camera footage from the small terminal showed a blurry figure in a long, dark coat and wide-brimmed hat approaching the counter, but the angle obscured his face. He never boarded the plane that the agent could recall. Yet, according to the weight and balance sheet filed by the pilot, the plane's calculated takeoff weight included the weight of a passenger in seat 1C. The flight was uneventful for the first 40 minutes. Elias's recording captures the drone of the engine, the idle chatter of the other passengers, a retired couple, 2 fishermen. Then, at the 41-minute mark, the pilot's voice comes over the cabin speaker, calm but puzzled. "Folks, this is your captain. We've got a slight anomaly here. The weight and balance indicator is showing a shift in the cargo hold. Probably just a bag that wasn't secured. I'm going to ask you all to remain seated while I check it." The recording picks up the sound of the cockpit door unlatching, the pilot's footsteps moving down the small aisle towards the rear of the plane. Then, a long silence. Too long. One of the fishermen calls out, "Everything okay back there, Cap?" No answer. Then a new sound enters the recording. A slow, rhythmic scraping, like something heavy being dragged across the corrugated metal floor of the cargo hold, directly beneath the passenger cabin. The retired woman whispers, "What is that?" The scraping stops. It is replaced by a sound Elias described in his subsequent interview as a wet, clicking inhalation, like a dog sniffing at a crack. But bigger. The plane's engine coughs. Not a sputter, but a distinct, jarring hesitation, as if it had momentarily choked. The cabin lights flicker. The inciting incident is captured on the tape. The cockpit door at the front of the plane, which the pilot had left open, slowly swings shut. Not from turbulence. The movement is deliberate, careful. The latch clicks. From behind the closed door, a voice that is almost, but not quite, the pilot's comes over the intercom. "It is slightly too high. The cadence just off. Apologies for the concern. Everything is secured. Please prepare for a change in course." The plane banks sharply, without warning, throwing passengers against their windows. The engine sound changes pitch, deepening to a labored groan as the plane begins to descend into the thickening forest canopy below. On the recording, you can hear the fishermen shouting, the woman sobbing, and underneath it all, a new sound, a faint, high-pitched chittering like laughter, emanating from the cargo hold. Elias, in a state of sheer panic, had the presence of mind to keep his recorder running, pointed at the floor. The plane leveled out, skimming just above the treetops. Then, the final transmission from the plane was sent. Not a mayday. The cockpit voice recorder, recovered from the severely damaged, but never found black box data, according to the sealed file, captured the pilot's last words. They were a whisper, choked with terror. "It's in the cockpit. It's not human. It's smiling. It's telling me to land in the clearing. It's so hungry. God." The smell, the transmission cuts out with the sound of tearing metal, and a shriek that is only partially human. What happened next is Elias Vance's testimony, which was deemed not suitable for public release due to traumatic incoherence, but forms the core of the sealed document. The plane crash landed in a small, boggy clearing, shearing its wings, but leaving the cabin mostly intact. Elias was knocked unconscious. He awoke to silence, broken by the hiss of escaping fuel and the moans of the injured. It was dusk. As he struggled free of his seatbelt, he saw movement outside the cracked window. The tall, dark-coated figure from the terminal, Mr. G. Tallman, was standing at the edge of the clearing. It was discarding its hat and coat, revealing a gaunt, grayish body. It moved towards the wreck with a predatory, eager gait. Elias, hidden by debris, watched as it approached the open fuselage. It did not help. It leaned over the injured retired man and simply inhaled. A shimmering, mist-like substance seemed to flow from the man's mouth and nostrils into the creature's. The man's moaning stopped. His body went rigid, then utterly still, as if vacuum-sealed. The creature repeated this with each passenger, grotesque feeding. Then it approached the cockpit. Elias heard the chittering laugh again, followed by a sound of rending. He seized his chance and stumbled into the woods. He wandered for 3 days before a search plane spotted him. The verification is in the contradictions. The official crash site was never physically located, though Elias's coordinates were logged. The search team, using his coordinates, found evidence of a landing, broken branches, a single piece of Cessna tail number plating, but no fuselage, no bodies, no large clearing. The area was dense, boggy forest. Elias's recorder was recovered. The audio analysis in the sealed file notes the anomalous vocalizations and the physiologically improbable inhalation sounds. Most damning is the weight and balance sheet. A follow-up audit found the original had been altered. The digital record showed seat 1C was empty at booking, but a manual override, performed from a terminal with no login attached, added the passenger and his weight 15 minutes before departure. Elias Vance spent 6 months in a psychiatric institution. He was diagnosed with acute trauma and survivor's guilt. The official report stands. The unresolved detail is an internal memo from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police's Unsolved Cases Unit, appended to the file. It notes 3 other small plane disappearances in northern Canada over the past 20 years, where the passenger manifest showed 1 extra and filled seat purchased in cash under the aliases G. Tallman, L. Longstride, and A. Gaunt. In each case, the wreckage was never found, and the only ever recovered piece of evidence was a single, long, grayish hair caught on a piece of wreckage, submitted for DNA testing. The lab results, quoted in the memo, read, "Sample non-human. Chromosomal structure unclassifiable. Metabolic markers indicate a severe, chronic state of starvation, despite the sample's keratin composition suggesting a healthy organism. Contradiction unresolved." The Archives of St. Ignatius Hospital. Dr. Eleanor Shaw took the position of head archivist at the now-shuttered St. Ignatius Hospital in Montreal as a challenge. The building, a decaying Gothic Revival monolith, was slated for demolition, and her job was to catalog a century of medical records before they were digitized and destroyed. For Eleanor, a woman who found serenity in dust and order, it was a perfect puzzle. The records were a chaotic mess, but she noticed a strange consistency, a disproportionate number of admissions from 1927 to 1933 for a specific, vague diagnosis listed as cachexia of unknown origin, with psychotic features. The patients, from all walks of life, were described as emaciated, paranoid, and suffering from severe auditory hallucinations. They all reported hearing a whistling in the walls and seeing a tall visitor before their rapid decline. Most died within weeks. The cause of death was always listed as cardiac arrest or systemic failure. The first modern anomaly was physical. In the sub-basement, a room not on any architectural blueprint, Eleanor found a sealed storage vault. The lock was rusted shut, but the door itself was cold to the touch in the warm, stagnant air. When maintenance finally cut it open, they found not records, but a small, tiled room that resembled an old hydrotherapy suite. In the center was a stained, ceramic tub. The walls were covered, floor to ceiling, in scratches. Not random graffiti, but tall, vertical gouges, as if something had been methodically clawing at the plaster for years. At the very top, near the 10-foot ceiling, the scratches formed words in frantic, desperate French. Il chante pour moi et j'y fame. He sings for me, and I am hungry. The room had no door handle on the inside. Eleanor, intrigued, cross-referenced the room with the patient files. She found a match. Patient number 3341, admitted in 1931, was a boilermaker named Henry LeBlanc. His file noted he was found wandering near the railway yards, screaming about a thin priest who followed him, singing a hymn that made his stomach ache with hunger. He was placed in secure hydrotherapy for sedation. He was transferred to the morgue 3 days later. The file's final note, in a different, more hurried script, read, "Subject expired. Room OB to be sealed pending review." Dr. L. Room OB was not on any floor plan. It was the sub-basement room. The inciting incident was auditory. Working late one evening, Eleanor heard it, a faint, melodic whistling. It seemed to come from the ventilation grill in her office. It was a tuneless, airy sound, like wind through a narrow pipe, but it held a perverse semblance of a song, something almost liturgical. It made the hair on her arms stand up. Following the sound, she took a flashlight into the main archival stacks, a vast room of towering metal shelves. The whistling grew clearer, now accompanied by a soft, wet dragging sound. She turned a corner into row 87, which housed the 1930s psychiatric files. At the far end of the aisle, a motion-activated light flickered on. A figure was standing there, its back to her. It was tall and wore what appeared to be the tattered, gray remnants of an orderly's uniform from the hospital's early era. Its head was tilted upwards, as if reading the labels on the top shelves. The whistling was emanating from it. Eleanor froze, her professional curiosity warring with primal dread. The figure stopped whistling. In the sudden silence, it spoke, its voice a dry rasp. "Record. Retrieval. Number 3341. Henry LeBlanc's patient number." It began to turn, its movement stiff, jerky, like a stop-motion film. Eleanor's flashlight beam caught its profile. The side of its face was sunken, skeletal, the skin a waxy yellow-gray. Its lips were pulled back from long, discolored teeth in a grimace that was not a smile. It was not breathing yet. The whistling had just come from it. Its eyes, when they fully turned to her, were milky and blind. It took a step forward, and the dragging sound revealed its source. One foot was twisted, useless, the bones clearly shattered, scraping along the concrete floor. It raised a long-fingered hand, pointing a bony index finger directly at her. The raspy voice issued a command. "Update the file. State cause of death." It took another scraping step. "I am still hungry." Eleanor ran. She didn't stop until she was outside in the cool night air. The verification comes from the demolition contractor's report and the Montreal police. When Eleanor returned with security, the figure was gone. But in row 87, on the floor where it had stood, was a large, dark stain that smelled of mildew and old copper. On the shelf at the exact spot it had been reading, the file for patient number 3341, Henry LeBlanc, lay open. It had not been opened before. It was still bound by its archival tape, which was now broken. A new note was scrawled across the final page in a shaky, watery script that matched the handwriting of the long-dead Dr. L. It read, "Cause of death, metabolic vampirism. Subject's essence was drained by an entity attached to this institution. Entity is not a ghost. It is a parasite that feeds on despair and biological energy. It was here before the hospital. The hospital was built to contain it. We failed. Do not reopen room OB." The police treated it as a trespassing vandal, but the forensic analysis of the stain was puzzling. It was not blood or any known chemical. A historian consulted on the Dr. L note confirmed the handwriting matched that of the hospital's director, Dr. Alistair Langford, who had died in a suspicious suicide in 1933, jumping from the hospital roof after ordering the sub-basement sealed. The demolition proceeded. The unresolved detail is in the final surveyor's scan before the implosion. A ground-penetrating radar image of the foundation showed a series of anomalous root-like structures spreading from beneath room OB, extending deep into the earth, and also upwards through the walls, following the path of the old ventilation shafts all the way to the roof. The lead surveyor noted it looked less like structural damage and more like the spread of a fungal mycelium or a circulatory system. The hospital was demolished. The site is now a parking lot, Security guards for the adjacent buildings have filed reports included in a miscellaneous police file of hearing faint whistling on windy nights and seeing a tall limping figure in the shadows of the parking garage, always near the air vents. The reports are always filed and always closed with the same note: no trespasser found. Possible audio-visual echo from demolished structure. The cicada summer of Millfield, Ohio. The town of Millfield, Ohio, knew the 17-year cicada brood was coming. The scientists had it on the calendar. The locals prepared for the noise, the shells on the trees, the natural spectacle. But when Brood X emerged in the summer of 2021, something was off in Millfield. The cicadas here were different. They were a dull, grayish-black instead of ruddy brown, and their signature chorus was wrong. It wasn't the collective, rhythmic hum of millions of wings. It was a discordant, atonal shrieking that seemed to carry words in its dissonance. People reported hearing their names whispered within the noise. Pets hid. Migratory birds altered their flight paths to avoid the area. Samir Gupta, an entomologist from the State University, was dispatched to investigate what was being called an atypical brood manifestation. A meticulous man in his 50s, Samir set up acoustic monitors and collection traps in the woods just outside town. The data was bizarre. The cicada's sound frequency was inconsistent, fluctuating in patterns that mimicked human speech waveforms. His traps filled not only with cicadas, but with the carcasses of small forest creatures, shrews, voles, young rabbits that appeared desiccated, as if mummified. Despite the humid summer air, they showed no signs of predation, only 2 tiny, precise puncture marks on their necks. The inciting incident was a pattern in the trees. Mapping the locations of the dead animals, Samir noticed they formed a rough, spiraling line leading deeper into a private, densely wooded gully known locally as the Holler. Historical Society records showed the Holler had been avoided since pioneer days. Cited in a settler's diary as a place where the locusts sing a devil-esque hymn and the game grows thin. Following the spiral, Samir reached the center of the gully. There, he found a single, massive oak tree dead for decades, its bark stripped away. Carved into its bare trunk were thousands upon thousands of cicada shells, pressed into the wood as if by immense heat, forming a vast, sprawling symbol that hurt the eyes to look at for too long. At the base of the tree, the earth was bare, black, and powdery, and sitting cross-legged in the center of the black earth was a figure. It was humanoid, but its skin was covered in a moving, chitinous carapace that shimmered gray-black in the dappled light. Cicadas crawled over it, flew to it, and merged with it, becoming part of its form. Its face was elongated, with large, multifaceted insectal eyes that reflected the forest in a million broken pieces. Its mouth was a small, round orifice. It was utterly still, but the air around it vibrated with the terrible, word-like shrieking of the corrupted brood. Samir's acoustic monitor, still recording in his backpack, peeked into the red. The figure's head rotated towards him with a series of tiny, clicking pops. It raised one arm. Instead of a hand, its forearm ended in a sharp, stiletto-like ovipositor. It spoke, not through its mouth, but through the cacophony of the cicadas in the trees around them. The shrieks coalesced into a single, buzzing sentence that filled the air. The cycle is broken. The host is weak. A new form is required. It stood, unfolding to a height of nearly 8 feet, its limbs jointed all wrong. It took a step towards him, the ovipositor glinting. Samir stumbled backwards, crashing through the undergrowth. The cicada chorus swelled to a deafening, predatory roar, and he felt a sharp pain on the back of his neck, as if stung. He ran, not stopping until he reached his car. The verification is found in the Ohio Department of Agriculture's suppressed report on anomalous Brood X behavior. Samir's samples were analyzed. The cicada's anatomy showed strange mutations, atrophied digestive systems, and enlarged, specialized salivary glands that produced a potent neurotoxic and anticoagulant enzyme. The enzyme matched the substance found in the puncture wounds on the desiccated animals. Satellite thermal imaging of the Holler, taken that summer, showed a persistent cold spot at the location of the dead oak. despite the heat wave. Most compelling was Samir's own medical report. The sting on his neck left a welt that refused to heal for weeks. A biopsy revealed not just venom, but microscopic, chitinous fragments embedded in his skin, fragments that showed cellular activity, as if they were trying to grow. Samir took an indefinite leave of absence. The town of Millfield held a collective breath. The cicadas died off on schedule, their strange chorus falling silent. The unresolved detail is in the soil samples and the following year's wildlife census. The black, powdery earth from the base of the oak was analyzed. It was sterile, devoid of all microbial life, and laced with heavy concentrations of a compound similar to insect pheromones. The Ohio Division of Wildlife's annual report noted a significant, unexplained population crash of small mammals within a 5-mile radius of the holler. The numbers have not recovered, and every night since that summer, residents on the eastern edge of Millfield report hearing just on the edge of sleep a faint rhythmic clicking like insect legs rubbing together that seems to come from the walls or the attic. It is always followed by a dry, whispering buzz that sounds like two words. Soon. Hungry. Pest control finds nothing. The local police have a standing file, updated with each complaint, titled Environmental Nuisance Insects. The most recent entry, from last month, includes a note from an officer who responded. Complainant insists the sound is forming words. Claimed it said, 17 years, repeatedly. Home inspection negative. Advised complainant to seek audio recording. No recording has ever been submitted. The last broadcast of Cobvir 88.7 FM. Amara Cruz was the overnight host of the night stream on college radio station Cobvir 88.7 FM in Corvallis, Oregon. Her show was a mix of indie music, obscure sound collages, and calls from insomniacs, students cramming for exams, and lonely truckers on the I-5. For Amara, the quiet hours between M and AM were a sacred space of curated melancholy and connection. The studio was a cozy, analog cave of mismatched furniture, vinyl records, and the warm glow of vacuum tube equipment. Her only company was the station's ancient, semi-feral studio cat, a one-eared tom named Sprocket. The first anomaly was a caller. On October 29th, at 3:17 a.m., a man identifying himself as Jeremy from the Coast Range came on the line. His voice was calm, almost too calm, and he spoke with the precision of a lecturer. Amara, thank you for taking my call. I'm conducting an audio survey of regional nocturnal phenomena. Are you familiar with the vocalizations of the Pacific tree frog, Pseudacris regilla? Amara, humoring him, played a short clip of frog calls from her sound library. Jeremy was silent for a moment, then said, "Fascinating. Now, listen to this." He played a recording over the phone. It was a close, wet, clicking sound, like two sticks being rubbed together rapidly, but with a fleshy undertone. This was recorded last night, 15 miles east of the Mary's Peak summit. It's a mimic. It was repeating the tree frog call, but imperfectly. It added a hunger to it. Do you hear it? Amara, unnerved, cut the call short. The audio levels had shown Jeremy's voice registering at a strangely flat, consistent frequency, with none of the natural variation of a human on a cell phone. The next night, Jeremy called again. This time, he was broadcasting from what sounded like a moving vehicle, the rumble of tires on gravel underneath his words. Amara, it's learning. It's moved closer. I played a recording of a chainsaw yesterday. Tonight, it played the chainsaw back, but the sound was wrong. It was meteor. It's interpreting sound through the lens of consumption. I think it's hunting by sonar. By offering it new sounds, the call cut out with a burst of static that formed a brief, shuddering echo of Amara's own voice saying, Cobvir. The inciting incident occurred on Halloween night. Amara was playing a long, droning ambient track. The studio lights flickered. Sprocket, who was sleeping on a monitor, shot upright, his back arched, hissing at the darkened control room window. The track on air began to warp, slowing down, the drone deepening into a subharmonic rumble that made Amara's teeth ache. Then, Jeremy's voice cut in, clear as a bell, overriding the broadcast signal. He was panting, whispering, "Amara, it's here, at my truck. It's been following the signal, my broadcast signal. It understands radio waves." It's a sound of shattering glass, a heavy thud against metal, and a scream that was abruptly silenced. Then, a new sound filled the airwaves, the same wet clicking from Jeremy's first call. But now, it was loud, close to his microphone, and rhythmic. It was followed by a slow, deliberate tearing, and a low, gluttonous swallowing. The Kopveer transmitter was now broadcasting a live feed of Jeremy being consumed. Amara sat frozen in horror, staring at the on-air light. The sound stopped, a moment of dead air, filled only with the faint hiss of the open mic from Jeremy's location. Then, a voice came through. It was Jeremy's voice, but it was wrong. The cadence was stolen, the timbre hollow, a perfect recording played back through a rotten speaker. "Amara, thank you for the connection. New frequency acquired. So many voices in the wire. So hungry." The thing was speaking to her, using Jeremy's devoured voice. The studio lights died, plunging her into darkness except for the emergency exit sign and the ghostly green glow of the VU meters, which were now pulsating in time with the clicking sound still emanating from the speakers. Sprocket yowled and bolted from the room. Amara fumbled for the master switch to kill the broadcast, but the console was dead. The Kopveer 88.7 FM signal was no longer under her control. The Jeremy thing began to broadcast. It started playing audio clips. It had scavenged snippets of previous callers to her show, fragments of songs she had played, news broadcasts, all warped and layered over that horrific, hungry clicking. Then, it began to transmit new sounds. The sound of doors rattling in homes across the broadcast range. The sound of a child's whispered nightmare, pulled from a baby monitor. The sound of a solitary person breathing in their sleep, amplified and echoed back. It was mapping its hunting ground through the radio waves, reflecting the private sounds of the night back at the listeners, searching for a response. The verification comes from the Federal Communications Commission's investigation and the internal logs of the Kopveer Engineering Department. A flood of calls from terrified listeners reached the campus police and the FCC. The station's transmitter, located on a hill outside town, was found to be operating at 150% of its licensed power, despite the main studio console being offline. The hardware was physically incapable of this. When engineers finally reached the transmitter shack and pulled the main breaker, the broadcast continued for another 17 seconds before dying an impossibility without a backup power source, of which there was none. The most damning evidence was the digital audit trail. The station's automated logging system recorded the entire event. Forensic audio analysis of the Jeremy recordings confirmed the initial calls originated from a location deep in the Coast Range. The final, horrific broadcast originated from that same location, but the signal had been somehow hijacked and amplified through the Kopveer transmitter without any electronic handshake or command from the studio. The FCC report, heavily redacted, cites an unexplained carrier wave intrusion and spectral piracy of unknown origin. Amara left radio permanently. Sprocket the cat was never found. The unresolved detail is in the nightly logs of amateur radio operators' hams in the Willamette Valley. To this day, on certain clear, cold nights, a pirate signal intermittently appears on or near the 88.7 FM frequency. It broadcasts only for minutes at a time. It consists of layered, distorted snippets of old radio programs, CB radio chatter, and cell phone conversations, all woven together with that distinctive wet clicking. Those who have heard it and reported it to the FCC all describe the same finale. The clicking stops and a hollow stolen voice, sometimes a man, sometimes a woman, sometimes a child's, whispers the same phrase before the signal vanishes. Signal strong. Appetite growing. Standby. The FCC lists these as deliberate, malicious pranks, but no source has ever been located. The signal's point of origin, when triangulated by hams, always seems to be moving, drifting slowly eastward through the forested peaks, following the path of least resistance, and the densest populations of silent, listening creatures. For nearly 3 hours, we have presented evidence, not rumors, not folklore, not the unverified tales of a lonely highway. These are incidents drawn from police reports, declassified government documents, sworn eyewitness testimony, and the internal case files of the most dedicated paranormal research effort in modern history. The story of Skinwalker Ranch is not a single horror, but a mosaic of dread, each piece verified, each fragment pointing to a larger, more disturbing picture. We have walked with Michael Evans through the impossible geometry of the 30-mile canyon, where space itself becomes a trap, and a silent observer watches from the rim. We have stood with Dr. Eleanor Shaw as something learned to wear a human voice, practicing its imitation just outside the door. We have seen the legacy of the Sherman family's whole, an interface to something buried deep, that predates all modern investigation. We have followed Tom Gunderson's futile hunt for an invisible predator that harvests living tissue with surgical, terrifying precision. We have decoded Lena Petrov's malicious signal broadcasts, proving an intelligence deep in the earth that is aware, communicative, and retaliatory. We have peered through Dr. Maurice Thorne's window into 1894, and received a warning passed hand to hand across a century. We have watched Ryan Chen's AI track phantoms of heat and cold, and in trying to understand them, may have set something free. We have uncovered Maya Flores's unfound room, the bricked-up tomb of a 1950 seconds failure that proved the phenomenon was waiting long before we arrived. We have listened to the land through Walter Briggs, the custodian who spoke a language older than history, and who vanished when his role was complete. We have been evicted by the Recurrence, a digital ghost from the past that learned to speak through our own servers. And finally, we have seen Dr. Robert Kearns's last photograph, a family portrait of the impossible, a hierarchy of horrors, with the observer himself included in the frame. So, what is the verified conclusion? This is not a haunting. The evidence does not support the idea of residual echoes or lost souls. This is not about extraterrestrials in the classic sense, though the implications are cosmic in scale. The testimony of ranchers, scientists, soldiers, and engineers corroborated across decades paints a consistent portrait of an intelligent, adaptive, and deeply embedded phenomenon. It manipulates space-time. It breaches barriers between what we call the past, present, and future. It learns our technology, mimics our forms, and studies our behavior with a clinical, often menacing, curiosity. It is an ecology of the absurd, thriving in a 512-acre laboratory where the laws of physics are merely suggestions. The true horror of Skinwalker Ranch is its coherence. The entities are not separate. The events are not random. They are facets of a single, unsettling reality. We are not alone on this planet. And what shares this land with us operates from a set of rules we are only beginning to glimpse, from motivations we may never fully comprehend. It is a reminder that our understanding of the world is a thin veneer, and beneath it lies a reality far stranger and far more dangerous than we have dared to imagine. If you take one thing from this documentary, let it be this: trust the data, trust the corroboration. The witnesses were not unreliable. Their tools were not faulty. They were confronting something that exists in the gaps of our perception, something verified. Now, your role begins. Subscribe to Verified Nightmare. In a world where these stories are documented fact, awareness is your first and only line of defense. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell. We are your source for the verified truth in a landscape of uncertainty. Like this video. This documentary represents thousands of hours of research and synthesis. Your like boosts its visibility, helping other truth seekers find this channel and this evidence. Comment below. We actively investigate viewer accounts. Your own strange experience, no matter how small, could be a crucial piece of a larger puzzle. Every detail matters. This has been a comprehensive report on the verified horrors of Skinwalker Ranch. Remember, the most profound mysteries are not always in the distant stars. Sometimes, they are in the soil beneath our feet, in the silence of a Utah night, in the static between channels, waiting for a moment of weakness in the light we shine upon them. This is verified nightmare. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and above all, stay safe.